I wasn't supposed to hear it. That's the first thing I keep telling myself, like it somehow makes everything that followed less real. Like if I repeat it enough, I can go back to being the same person I was before that night. But the truth is, I did hear it. Every word. And once you hear something like that, there's no one hearing it. It started out completely normal. Just another late evening. The kind where the apartment feels too quiet even with music playing in the background. Scott had gone out earlier, said he was meeting some friends. Nothing unusual. We'd been roommates for almost a year at that point, and our lives had settled into this easy rhythm. Same classes, same grocery runs, same lazy Sundays where we'd just sit around watching whatever was trending. And he was the kind of guy everyone assumed they understood at first glance. Confident, easygoing, always surrounded by people. Girls especially. I'd watched enough of them come and go to convince myself I knew exactly who he was. Straight, untouchable, off limits, which should have made everything simple. It didn't. That night, I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. I'd just come back from a late walk, keys still in my hand, when I heard voices from the living room. Scott's voice and someone else's. Lower, more serious. I paused without thinking. Not because I was curious at least, that's what I told myself, but because something in his tone felt off. Not his usual relaxed, joking voice. This was quieter, tighter, like he was holding something back. So I stayed still. I don't think I can keep pretending, Scott said. My chest tightened instantly. Pretending? There was a short silence. Then the other guy Easton sighed. I recognized the name right away. Scott had mentioned him a few times. Old friend. Someone from before we met. You've been saying that for months, Easton replied. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Frustration, or maybe concern. Yeah, well, Scott let out a dry laugh. It's different now. I don't know what it was about that sentence, but it hit me wrong. Like something shifted in the air. I should have walked in, made some noise, let them know I was back. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, just out of sight, listening. What changed? Easton asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Scott said something so quiet I almost missed it. He did. My stomach dropped. I didn't need him to say my name. I knew. There's this weird moment when your brain refuses to process what you just heard. Like it replays it, trying to make it mean something else. Something safer. But there wasn't another meaning. I leaned slightly closer to the doorframe, heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Easton let out a slow breath. You mean your roommate? Scott didn't answer right away. Then, finally, yeah. That was it. One word. But it felt like everything inside me just stopped. I don't know how long I stood there after that. Seconds, maybe. Or minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. You're serious? Easton asked. I don't know what I am, Scott admitted. And that more than anything shook me. Because I'd never heard him sound unsure before. Ever. Not about anything. He exhaled sharply. It's different with him. I notice things I shouldn't. The way he looks at me sometimes. The way he laughs at dumb stuff I say. It gets in my head. My grip tightened around my keys. Was I doing that? Looking at him like that? I'd spent months trying not to. You ever think maybe it's not just in your head? Easton said carefully. Scott didn't respond. And somehow, that silence said more than anything else. My pulse was racing now, heat creeping up my neck. I should have left. Seriously. Any sane person would have backed away right then, gone to their room, pretended none of this ever happened. But I couldn't move. Look, Easton continued, his voice softer now. You can't keep ignoring it forever. It's either something, or it's not. But you're not going to figure that out by acting like it doesn't exist. I know, Scott muttered. Another pause. Then, I just don't want to screw things up. That one hit harder than the rest. Because suddenly, this wasn't just some abstract conversation anymore. This was real. This was about us. About the life we'd built in that apartment. The dumb routines, the inside jokes, the comfortable silence. And maybe something more that neither of us had said out loud. I get that, Easton said. But pretending isn't exactly safe either. Scott let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, tell me about it. There was a shift like someone stood up or moved closer. Does he know? Easton asked. My breath caught. Scott didn't hesitate this time. No. And for some reason that hurt. Not because I expected him to tell me. That would have been insane. But hearing it said like that so definite made everything feel more complicated. Like there was this entire side of him I'd never seen, even after all this time. Or maybe, I just hadn't been looking close enough. You gonna tell him? Easton pressed. A long silence followed. So long I thought maybe Scott wouldn't answer at all. Then, I don't know if I can. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Fear. Not rejection fear. And that changed everything. Because suddenly, this wasn't just some one-sided confusion in my own head anymore. This was real, mutual, messy, dangerous. And I was standing right outside the room, hearing all of it unfold without him having any idea. That's when I realized something I probably should have understood way earlier. If I walked in now, nothing would ever be the same again. But if I didn't, it might be worse. And somehow, without fully deciding to, I shifted my weight forward, just enough to make the floor creak under my foot. The floor creaked louder than I expected. Not just a subtle shift, no. It was enough to cut straight through the silence in the room. The kind of sound that instantly gives you away. Everything froze. For a split second, I considered bolting. Just turning around, walking out, pretending I'd never come back yet. But it was too late. Did you hear that? Easton said. My heart slammed against my ribs. There was movement quick, sharp. A chair scraping lightly against the floor. Then Scott's voice, closer now. Yeah. Footsteps. Coming toward the hallway. Shit. I didn't have time to think. Didn't have time to come up with some believable excuse. I just reacted. Took a step forward, like I had every right to be there. Like I hadn't just been standing outside listening to a conversation that was never meant for me. Scott appeared in the doorway. And the moment his eyes landed on me, something shifted. Not surprise. Not exactly. More like realization. You've been here long? He asked. There it was. No small talk. No pretending. Straight to it. I forced my grip to loosen around my keys, hoping he wouldn't notice how tense I was. Just got back? I said, trying to sound normal. Casual. Why? His gaze didn't leave mine. For a second, I thought he didn't believe me. Behind him, I could see Easton now leaning slightly to the side, studying me in a way that made my skin feel too tight. Like he was trying to piece something together. Scott exhaled quietly, running a hand through his hair. Nothing. Thought I heard something. Yeah, I replied, stepping past him into the apartment. Probably me. The air inside felt different. Heavier. Like the conversation I'd just overheard was still hanging there, unfinished. I set my keys down on the counter, hyper-aware of both of them watching me. Every movement felt exaggerated. Too loud. Too obvious. Hey, I added, glancing at Easton. You must be Easton. He gave a small nod. Yeah. Up close, he looked exactly like I imagined, calm, observant, the kind of guy who notices more than he says. And right now, he was definitely noticing something. Scott's told me about you. I continued, forcing a slight smile. Easton's lips twitched, like he almost smiled back, but didn't quite commit. Has he? There was something loaded in that question. I felt it. And I knew Scott felt it too, because the second it left Easton's mouth, Scott shifted beside me. Subtle, but noticeable. Not much, Scott cut in quickly. Just stuff. Stuff. Right. Silence stretched between us. It was unbearable. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my chest, everywhere. Every second that passed made it harder to pretend I didn't know what I knew. And then Easton did something I didn't expect. He stood up. Well, he said, brushing his hands together lightly. I should probably get going. Scott frowned slightly. You don't have to. I do. Easton interrupted, but his tone wasn't harsh. Just final. He glanced at me again, eyes lingering for a second longer than necessary. We'll talk later. There it was again. That feeling. Like I'd just been silently included in something I wasn't supposed to understand yet. Scott hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Okay. Easton grabbed his jacket, heading toward the door. As he passed me, he paused just for a second. You should be careful, he said quietly. I blinked. About what? But he just gave a small, knowing look, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. And suddenly, it was just me and Scott. Alone. The silence that followed was worse than anything before. Because now there was no buffer. No distraction. No way to avoid what was sitting right between us. I turned slowly, leaning back against the counter like it might somehow steady me. Scott was still standing near the doorway, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. Neither of us spoke. Not at first. And then, how much did you hear? There it was. No denial. No pretending. Just the truth, laid out between us. I swallowed, my throat dry. There were 100 ways I could have answered that. 100 ways to make this easier. Safer. I didn't choose any of them. Enough, I said. Scott closed his eyes for a second, like he'd expected that. He muttered under his breath. The word hung in the air. I watched him carefully, trying to read him the same way I had been for months without even realizing it. The tension in his shoulders. The way his fingers curled slightly inside his pockets. He wasn't angry. He was nervous. And that did something to me. You could have just told me, I said before I could stop myself. His eyes snapped open. Told you what? I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head. Don't do that. Do what? Act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Another pause. Long, heavy. Then Scott stepped closer. Not all the way. Just enough to close some of the distance between us. You weren't supposed to hear that, he said. I huffed a quiet, almost humorless laugh. Yeah, I got that part. That's not what I meant. I looked at him, really looked this time. And suddenly, everything I'd ignored before made sense. The looks, the pauses, the way conversations sometimes felt like they were going somewhere, and then didn't. It had all been leading here. I mean, Scott continued, voice lower now. You weren't supposed to have to deal with it. That hit different. I frowned slightly. Deal with what? His gaze dropped for a second, then came back to mine. Me. The way he said it quiet, uncertain made something twist in my chest. And before I could think better of it, I pushed off the counter and stepped closer too. Now we were standing just a few feet apart, close enough that I could see the tension in his expression, the way he was holding himself back. Scott, I said softly, you really think I haven't been dealing with you this whole time? A flicker of something crossed his face. Confusion, hope, fear, all at once. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. I hesitated. This was it. The point where everything could either fall apart or finally make sense. My heart was pounding so hard it felt unreal. But I didn't back away. I mean, I said, holding his gaze, you're not the only one who's been pretending. And just like that, everything changed. The second the words left my mouth, I felt it. That shift, like the air between us tightened, charged with something neither of us could ignore anymore. Scott didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at me, really stared this time, like he was trying to figure out if I actually meant it, or if I was about to pull back and laugh it off like a joke. I didn't. You don't get to act like this is all in your head, I said, quieter now. Because it's not. His jaw flexed. Then what is it? He asked, and there was something raw in his voice now. Something real. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. This, I gestured vaguely between us, whatever this has been for the past few months. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You mean us being roommates? No, I said immediately. I mean everything that's not that. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes flicked down and back up like he was trying to ground himself. You're seriously telling me you didn't feel it? I added. Scott ran a hand through his hair again, pacing once like he needed the movement. I thought I was making it up. You weren't. I thought I was reading into things. You weren't. He stopped walking, looked at me again. And you're just okay with that? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Why wouldn't I be? Scott gave a dry, almost bitter smile. I don't know, maybe because I've been losing my mind over it. That made my chest tighten. Yeah, I said quietly. You're not the only one. That shut him up. Completely. For a second, all I could hear was both of us breathing. Too loud. Too uneven. Then Scott stepped closer again. This time slower. Like he was testing something. Say that again, he said. I swallowed. Which part? The part where you said it's not just me. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I didn't mean it, but because saying it again made it real in a way there was no coming back from. Still, I held his gaze. It's not just you, I repeated. Something in his expression broke. Not in a bad way. In a way that felt like relief. Like he'd been holding on to something for too long and finally let it go. Shit. He exhaled, almost under his breath. Yeah, that about summed it up. Neither of us moved for a few seconds after that. And somehow, the silence didn't feel as heavy anymore. Just intense. You know what the worst part is? Scott said finally. What? I had this whole plan, he admitted, shaking his head slightly. Like, I was going to figure it out first. Get my head straight. Then maybe say something. I couldn't help it, I let out a small laugh. Yeah? How was that going? He gave me a look. Terrible. Yeah, I figured. Another pause. But this one felt different. Less tense. More honest. Scott shifted his weight slightly, closer now than he'd ever been before without it being accidental. Can I ask you something? He said. You just did. He rolled his eyes faintly. You know what I mean. I nodded. Go ahead. His gaze dropped for a second, then came back. When did it start for you? That question hit harder than I expected, because I didn't have a clean answer. No clear moment. Just a build-up. I don't know, I admitted. It wasn't like one thing. It just kind of happened. Scott watched me closely. Like what? He pressed. I hesitated, then shrugged slightly. Little stuff, I guess. The way you'd sit too close on the couch and not move. The way you'd look at me and then look away like you got caught doing something. His lips parted slightly. And you noticed that? He asked. Yeah, I said simply. Didn't think you meant anything by it at first. And then, I let out a slow breath. Then I started hoping you did. That one landed. Hard. Scott's expression shifted again, something deeper this time. Less confusion, more something else. Something warmer. More certain. He muttered again, but softer now. I huffed a quiet laugh. You say that a lot. Yeah, well, he glanced at me, a faint smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. You're kind of a problem. Funny, I shot back. I was thinking the same thing about you. For the first time since all of this started. He smiled. Not his usual easy, confident grin. Something smaller, realer, and it did something to me I wasn't ready for. The space between us felt even smaller now, like it didn't exist at all. Okay, Scott said after a second, more serious again. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? The one we'd been avoiding this whole time. I looked at him, at how close he was, at the way he was watching me like the answer actually mattered. And it did. Now, I started then stopped. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure if this was something you talked through, or something you just did. Scott didn't move, didn't rush me, just waited. And somehow, that made it easier. I took a small step closer, close enough that if either of us leaned in even a little, we'd cross that line. His breath hitched, barely noticeable, but I felt it. We stopped pretending, I said quietly. Scott held my gaze. For a second, too. And then, yeah, he murmured. His voice was lower now, different. And before I could overthink it, before either of us could, his hand lifted slightly, like he wasn't sure if he should touch me, then hesitated. That hesitation, that almost did me in more than anything else, because it meant this mattered. So I closed the distance myself. Just enough. Just barely. And when my hand brushed his, everything snapped into place. The second my hand touched his, everything got quiet. Not the room, not the world, just everything inside my head. Like all the noise that had been building for months suddenly cut out, leaving just that one point of contact between us. Scott didn't pull away, but he didn't move either. For a split second, it felt like we were both waiting for the other one to decide if this was real or a mistake. Then his fingers shifted. Barely, but enough. They closed around mine. And that small movement hit harder than anything else so far. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, Scott murmured, almost like he was saying it to himself. Okay, I echoed. Neither of us let go. We were standing stupidly close now. Close enough that I could see every tiny shift in his expression, every flicker of hesitation or confidence as it came and went. You know this is a bad idea, right? He said after a second. There was no bite to it. No real warning. Just acknowledgement. Probably, I admitted. Could mess everything up. Yeah. He exhaled, a faint, almost disbelieving smile tugging at his lips. And we're still doing it anyway. I tilted my head slightly. You want to stop? That wiped the smile right off his face. No, he said immediately. Too fast. Too honest. And that did something to me. Then stop pretending like you do, I said quietly. Scott held my gaze. And something in his expression shifted again, less guarded now, like he'd finally decided to stop holding back. Okay, he repeated, firmer this time. His hand tightened slightly around mine. And then, he stepped closer. There was no space left between us now. I could feel the heat from him, the steady rise and fall of his chest. It should have felt overwhelming, but it didn't. It felt right. Terrifying, but right. You have no idea how long I've been trying not to do this, he said, voice low. I let out a quiet breath. You're not the only one. His eyes flicked between mine, searching for something. Permission, reassurance, or maybe just confirmation that this wasn't about to fall apart the second it started. So I gave it to him. I didn't step back, didn't break eye contact, didn't let go. And that was enough. Scott's free hand lifted slowly like before, but this time, he didn't hesitate as much. His fingers brushed lightly against my wrist first, then slid up, resting just below my elbow. Not pulling me closer. Just there. Grounding. Still okay, he asked. I nodded. Yeah. He watched me for another second. Then, quieter, tell me if I screw this up. I almost laughed at that. You will. A faint smirk flickered across his face. Good to know. And then, he leaned in. Slow enough that I could have stopped him. Fast enough that I didn't have time to overthink it. For a split second, everything narrowed down to just that space between us. The last inch. The last chance to pull away. I didn't. Neither did he. And when it finally happened, it wasn't rushed. Wasn't messy. It was careful. Like neither of us wanted to break whatever this was before it even fully started. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first. Testing. Like he was still half expecting me to flinch or step back. I didn't. Instead, I leaned in just slightly. Enough to meet him there. And that was all it took. Something shifted. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just solid. Like everything finally lined up the way it was supposed to. His hand tightened a little against my arm, pulling me closer by instinct more than intention. And this time, there was no hesitation. No second guessing. Just us. When we finally pulled back, it wasn't far. Just enough to look at each other again. Scott's expression was different. Not confused. Not uncertain. Just quiet. Real. Okay, he said again, softer now. I let out a small breath, a half smile pulling at my lips. You already said that. Yeah, he replied, not looking away. Just making sure it's still true. It was. More than true. But before I could say anything, the moment shifted. Not in a bad way. Just reality creeping back in. The apartment. The night. Everything we hadn't thought about for the last few minutes. Scott leaned his forehead lightly against mine for a second, exhaling. Easton's gonna have a field day with this, he muttered. I huffed quietly. He already knew. Yeah, Scott said, pulling back slightly. That's the problem. I raised an eyebrow. Why does that sound like there's more to that? Scott hesitated. Just for a second. And suddenly, that earlier conversation, the one I wasn't supposed to hear, flashed back in my head. The tension in Easton's voice. The way he said you should be careful. Scott, I said slowly, what aren't you telling me? His expression shifted again. Not pulling away, but not as open as it had been a second ago. It's nothing, he said. I didn't buy it. Doesn't sound like nothing. He exhaled, glancing toward the door for a second like he was debating something. Then back at me. It's just complicated, he said. I crossed my arms slightly. That's not an answer. I know. Then give me one. Another pause. Longer this time. And something in my chest tightened again, not like before, not anticipation. Something else. Something heavier. Scott ran a hand through his hair, clearly debating how much to say. And then, you hearing that conversation? He said quietly. Might not have been the worst thing. That wasn't reassuring. At all. Scott. He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time since this started, I saw something else there. Not fear. Not confusion. Something closer to concern. For you, he added. And just like that, that calm, steady feeling we'd just found, shifted again. Because whatever this was, wasn't going to stay simple. For you. Those two words didn't sit right. Not after everything that had just happened. I frowned, studying his face, trying to read what exactly he meant. What is that supposed to mean? Scott didn't answer immediately. He stepped back slightly, this time not far, but enough that the space between us wasn't charged in the same way anymore. Not softer, just heavier. That conversation, he said slowly. You didn't hear all of it. My chest tightened. Then tell me the part one missed. He exhaled through his nose, like he already regretted where this was going. It's not a big deal, he added quickly. Yeah, I replied, my tone flattening. That's usually a sign that it is. A flicker of something crossed his face, annoyance, maybe. Or just frustration with himself. I just don't want to make this weird, he said. I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. Scott, we literally just crossed every line we've been pretending isn't there. He didn't argue with that. Pretty sure we're past not weird, I added. That got a small, reluctant huff out of him. Yeah, he admitted. Fair. Silence stretched again. But this one felt different from before. Less like tension building, more like something waiting to drop. So, I pushed. What didn't I hear? Scott glanced toward the door again, like he was half expecting Easton to walk back in or something. Then he looked at me, and I saw it again. That hesitation. That's not just about me figuring stuff out, he said. I frowned. Okay, and it's not just about you either. That made my stomach twist. Then what is it about? He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly choosing his words carefully. Easton thinks this is a bad idea, he said finally. I blinked. That's it. Scott shook his head slightly. No. Then keep going. Another pause. Long enough that my patience started wearing thin. Scott. He thinks I'm going to mess this up, he said, quieter now. Something in my chest eased slightly at that. That's just your friend being protective, I replied. Doesn't mean anything. Scott didn't look convinced. He's not usually wrong, he muttered. I tilted my head. About you or about me? His eyes snapped back to mine. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He hesitated again. And that hesitation? That was worse than anything he could have just said outright. It's just, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair again, pacing once like before. You don't know everything. There it was. That line. The one that changes the tone of everything. I felt my jaw tighten slightly. Then tell me. Scott stopped pacing, looked at me, and for a second, I thought he would. But then, it's not my thing to say, he said. That hit like a wall. Are you serious? I asked, sharper than I meant to. I'm trying not to drag you into something you don't need to be in, he shot back. I'm already in it, I said immediately. You don't get to decide that for me. The tension snapped back into place. Different now. Less uncertain, more real. Scott held my gaze, something conflicted in his expression. I'm not trying to shut you out, he said. Then stop doing it. Another pause. Shorter this time. He looked like he was weighing something. Then, it's about Easton, he said. I crossed my arms slightly. What about him? Scott hesitated again, but pushed through it this time. He's not just some random friend, he said. Okay, we've known each other a long time. That doesn't explain anything. He exhaled. We used to mess around. The words landed heavier than I expected. Not because of what they meant, but because of how casually he said them. Like it was something he'd already processed. Something in the past. Still, it hit. You and Easton? I asked, just to be sure I heard that right. Yeah. I let out a slow breath, nodding once. Okay. Scott watched me carefully. You're not surprised? I mean, I shrugged slightly. After tonight? Not really. That seemed to relax him, just a little. It didn't mean anything, he added quickly. It was just a phase. Confusing time. We never. He stopped himself, shaking his head. It's over. Has been for a while. I studied him for a second, trying to decide how much that actually mattered. And he thinks this, I gestured between us, is a bad idea because of that. Partly. And the other part? Scott hesitated. Again. But this time, I didn't interrupt. I just waited. Because whatever he said next was going to matter. He thinks I don't know what I want, Scott said quietly. That. I could believe. And do you? I asked. His eyes locked onto mine. No hesitation this time. Right now, he said. Yeah. A beat. Then. Yeah. Simple. Clear. Honest. And somehow that was enough. For now, I let out a slow breath, some of the tension in my chest easing. Then I don't really care what he thinks, I said. Scott's lips twitched slightly. You might later. Why? He didn't answer. And yeah, that was getting old. But before I could push again, he stepped closer. Not hesitant this time. Not unsure. Just steady. Or, he said quietly, we could not overcomplicate this 5 minutes in. I raised an eyebrow. You mean ignore it? I mean, he corrected, focus on what actually matters right now. And what's that? His gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then back up. This. Yeah, that was convincing. I exhaled softly, shaking my head a little. You're unbelievable. Yeah, he said, a faint smirk forming again. But you're still here. He wasn't wrong. And before I could come up with a comeback, his hand found mine again. Less hesitant this time. More certain. And just like that, all the complicated stuff didn't disappear, but it got quieter, at least for the moment. Because right now, standing there, way too close again, none of that felt as important as it probably should have. And the worst part? I didn't care. I should have slowed it down. That's the part that keeps coming back to me now, how easy it was to just ignore everything complicated and lean into what felt good in the moment. Because standing there with Scott, his hand wrapped around mine again, all the tension from earlier didn't feel like a warning. It felt like momentum, and I let it pull me in. You're thinking too much again, Scott said quietly. I blinked, realizing I'd gone a little still. Am I that obvious? Only when you go quiet like that, he replied. I huffed a small breath. Maybe I just don't trust you. That earned me a look. Wow, he said dryly. We just kissed, and you're already doubting me? I'm serious, I added, not backing down. You just told me you used to be involved with your friend, said there's stuff I don't know, and then told me not to worry about it. Scott held my gaze. Didn't get defensive this time. Didn't brush it off. Fair, he admitted. That caught me off guard. But, he added, stepping a little closer again, I'm still here, aren't I? That doesn't automatically make you trustworthy. No, he agreed. But it means I'm not running. That landed. Because yeah, he wasn't. If anything, he was doing the opposite. Closing the distance again. And this time, when his hand slid from mine to my wrist, then up slightly, resting more firmly on my arm. There was no hesitation. No testing. Just intention. You can walk away if you want, he said quietly. I frowned. You really think I would? I think you should have the option, he replied. There was something different in his tone now. Not playful. Not teasing. Just honest. And that made this harder. Because suddenly, this wasn't just tension and curiosity anymore. It was choice. And I knew exactly what I was choosing. I'm not walking away, I said. Scott's eyes searched mine for a second, like he was checking if I meant it. Then he nodded once. Okay. And that was it. No big speech. No dramatic shift. Just that one word. But somehow, it felt heavier than anything else so far. His hand moved again, slower this time. Up my arm. To my shoulder. Not pulling. Just resting there. Grounding. And then, he leaned in first this time. No pause. No hesitation. Like he already knew the answer. The kiss wasn't careful anymore. Still controlled, but not tentative. Like whatever line we'd crossed before. We weren't pretending it wasn't there now. My hand came up without thinking, catching lightly at the front of his shirt. And that tiny movement. That was all it took for something to shift again. Scott exhaled against me, his grip tightening just slightly at my shoulder as he stepped closer. Too close now to call it accidental. Too close to pretend this wasn't exactly what we both wanted. When we broke apart this time, it wasn't because we were unsure. It was because we had to breathe. Yeah, he muttered, almost under his breath. I let out a quiet laugh, a little breathless. You keep doing that. Because I keep realizing this is actually happening, he shot back. Still think it's a bad idea? I asked. He looked at me. Really looked. Then shook his head once. No. That answer came easier this time. And I believed it more. For a second, neither of us moved again. But now it didn't feel tense. Just charged. Different. Come here, Scott said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. I'm literally already here. Closer, he corrected. And yeah, I didn't argue. I stepped in again, closing what little space was left between us. His hand slid from my shoulder to the back of my neck this time. Not rough. Not demanding. Just steady. Confident. And something about that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't ready for. Because this didn't feel like experimenting anymore. It didn't feel like confusion. It felt intentional. Still okay? He asked again. I nodded. Yeah. He held my gaze for another second, then leaned in again. And this time, there was nothing hesitant about it. Nothing unsure. Just heat. And the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't going back to what it used to be. Not after this. Not after us. And for the first time since I overheard that conversation, I stopped thinking about what could go wrong. Because right now, nothing about this felt like a mistake. That's the thing no one really tells you. It's not the moment itself that changes everything. It's what comes right after. Because standing there, still too close to Scott, his hand resting at the back of my neck like it belonged there, it felt easy. Natural, even. Like we'd just stopped fighting something that had already been there. But then reality starts creeping back in. Not all at once. Just little things. The apartment around us. The quiet. The fact that this wasn't just some one-time moment, it was something we'd have to deal with after. And I felt it. That shift. Not away from him. Just deeper into everything this meant. Scott didn't move right away. Neither did I. We were still standing close enough that I could feel his breath, still caught somewhere between what just happened and what we were supposed to do next. Okay, he said again, quieter this time. I let out a small breath, a faint smile pulling at my lips. You really need a new word. He huffed softly. Yeah, I know. But he didn't step back, didn't drop his hand. And honestly, neither did I. For a second, neither of us spoke. And for the first time since this started, it wasn't because we didn't know what to say. It was because we didn't need to rush it. You're thinking again, Scott said. I glanced at him. You're starting to sound like you know me too well. Maybe I do, he replied. That shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. But it did. Because yeah, he kind of did. All those months of pretending this was just normal roommate stuff, we'd still been paying attention to each other. Just not admitting it. Just trying to figure out what happens now, I said. Scott was quiet for a second. Then same. That surprised me. You don't already have a plan? I asked. He gave me a look. Do I seem like I have a plan right now? Fair point. A small smile tugged at his mouth again, but it faded quickly. Not in a bad way. Just thoughtful. Look, he said after a second, his voice a little more serious now. I'm not trying to screw this up. I watched him carefully. Then don't. It's not always that simple. Then make it simple. That made him pause. Actually pause. Like I'd said something he wasn't expecting. You really think it can be? He asked. I shrugged slightly. I think we're the ones who decide if it is or not. Scott studied me for a long second. And then, he nodded. Okay, he said again, but this time it sounded different. Like he actually meant something by it. Less automatic. More decided. Okay, what? I asked. Okay, we don't overcomplicate it, he said. We don't start acting weird. We don't pretend this didn't happen, but we also don't blow it up into something before we even understand it. I tilted my head slightly. That sounds like a plan. It's a rough one, he admitted. Better than nothing. Another small pause. Then, are you good with that? He asked. That question mattered. More than everything else he'd said. Because for the first time, it wasn't just about what he wanted. It was about both of us. I thought about it for a second. About everything that had just happened. About the conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. About Easton, and whatever history was still sitting there in the background. It wasn't simple. Not really. But standing here, with Scott looking at me like that, I didn't want to make it harder than it needed to be. Yeah, I said finally. I'm good with that. And I meant it. Something in his shoulders relaxed slightly. Not all the way, but enough. Good, he said. Then, after a second, also, we probably shouldn't just stand here all night. I smirked faintly. Why not? Because, he gestured vaguely around us. This is still our apartment. And I feel like if we stay right here any longer, we're going to forget that. I let out a quiet laugh. You're not wrong. Still, neither of us moved immediately. Because even if we should step back, neither of us really wanted to. Tomorrow's going to be weird, isn't it? I said. Scott exhaled lightly. Yeah, especially with Easton. At that, his expression shifted again. Subtle, but I caught it. Yeah, he repeated, a little more carefully this time. I narrowed my eyes slightly. You're still not telling me everything about that. I said it's complicated. And I said that's not an answer. He huffed softly, but there was no real irritation in it. I'll tell you, he said. Just not tonight. I studied him for a second, trying to decide if that was another deflection. But something about the way he said it felt real. Like he wasn't avoiding it, just delaying it. Fine, I said. Scott nodded once, like he appreciated that more than he was going to say. Then, finally, he stepped back, just a little. And yeah, I felt it. That tiny loss of contact. It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. But it did. Still, he didn't go far. Didn't turn away. Just gave us both a little space to breathe again. Guess we should act normal, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You think that's still an option? A faint smirk pulled at his lips. Probably not. Yeah, I agreed. Definitely not. But somehow, that didn't feel like a bad thing anymore. Not after everything. Not after finally knowing what had been there this whole time. And as we stood there, just a little farther apart than before, both trying to adjust to this new version of whatever we were now. One thought kept circling in my head. That conversation I overheard, it didn't just change everything. It started something we weren't ready for. And the worst part? I had a feeling it was only the beginning. The next morning felt off. Not in a bad way. Just different. Like everything in the apartment looked the same, but nothing actually was. I woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling for a few seconds before everything from last night hit me all at once. Scott. The conversation. The kiss. The fact that none of that could be undone now. I dragged a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. Yeah, okay, I muttered to myself, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it easier to process. It didn't, but it did make it real. I got up, pulled on a shirt, and headed toward the kitchen, already half expecting things to feel awkward. They didn't. They felt tense. Different kind of problem. Scott was already there, leaning against the counter, coffee in hand, like he'd been up for a while. He looked up when I walked in, and for a second, neither of us spoke. Not because we didn't know what to say, but because there was too much we could say. Morning, he said finally. Morning. Simple. Normal. But the way his eyes stayed on mine a second longer than usual? Yeah, not normal. I grabbed a mug, busying myself just enough to not stand there awkwardly. So, I said, pouring coffee. This is the part where we pretend everything's the same, right? Scott huffed lightly. That was the plan. And how's that working for you? Terrible. I glanced at him, smirking faintly. Yeah, same. That broke something. Not in a bad way. Just enough to ease the tension. A little. Scott pushed off the counter, setting his mug down. You still good? He asked. I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the way he asked it mattered. Yeah, I said. You? Yeah. And again it sounded honest. But not simple. Nothing about this was simple anymore. We stood there for a second, both clearly trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without overthinking every little thing. And then, a knock at the door. Sharp. Unexpected. We both froze. And I already knew. Before Scott even moved. Shit, he muttered. Yeah, same thought. He walked over, opening the door. And there he was. Easton, leaning casually against the frame like he'd been there 100 times before. But the second his eyes landed on both of us, he knew. I saw it immediately. That subtle shift in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Well, Easton said slowly, stepping inside. That didn't take long. Scott ran a hand through his hair. Easton, relax. Easton cut in, holding up a hand. I'm not here to start anything. His gaze shifted to me. More direct this time. More intentional. You okay? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Yeah, I replied. Why wouldn't I be? Easton studied me for a second, like he was checking for something. Then he nodded slightly. Good. Scott looked between us, clearly tense. You said you weren't gonna. I'm not, Easton said calmly. I just wanted to see for myself. For what? I asked. Easton glanced at Scott, then back at me. For this. There was no judgment in his tone, no attitude, just observation. And somehow, that was worse. Look, he continued, leaning back slightly against the wall. I meant what I said last night. To him, he nodded toward Scott. Not to you. That this is a bad idea? I asked. Easton shrugged lightly. That depends. On what? On whether he actually knows what he's doing. Scott let out a frustrated breath. I told you I do. Easton's eyes flicked to him. You think you do. I'm not confused anymore. Maybe, Easton replied. But you've said that before. That landed. Harder than anything else he'd said. I felt it. The history between them. The part one hadn't seen. Scott's jaw tightened. This isn't the same. Easton tilted his head slightly. Then prove it. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. And then, I stepped in. Or, I said, looking at Easton, you could stop acting like this is your decision. That got his attention. Fully. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not defensive. Not annoyed. Just surprised. Fair, he said after a second. Scott glanced at me, something unreadable in his eyes. I didn't look away. Because yeah, this wasn't just about them. It involved me too. Easton pushed off the wall, straightening slightly. I'm not trying to control anything, he said. Just making sure no one gets hurt. That's not really up to you, I replied. Another pause. Then, a small, almost approving smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. All right, he said. I can respect that. Scott exhaled quietly beside me, like some of the tension had finally eased. Good, he muttered. Easton glanced between us one last time, then nodded. Just don't lie to yourselves, he said. That's where things actually go wrong. And with that, he turned, heading for the door. No drama. No argument. Just gone. The door closed behind him, and the apartment went quiet again. I looked at Scott. He looked back at me. And for a second, we just stood there, taking it in. Everything. Still think this is simple? He asked. I let out a small breath, a faint smile forming despite everything. No. Still in. I didn't hesitate. Yeah. That was enough. Scott nodded once. And this time, when he stepped closer again, there was no hesitation. No doubt. Just the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't going away. And honestly, I didn't want it to.